Hi, this is Shekhar Srinivasan, Managing Director, LS Solutions Private Limited, .NET Architect and a trainer. In this video, we will try to understand how to interact with the database in an Android application developed using C# with the support of Xamarin. When we want to interact with the database within a mobile device, there are certain problems we will be encountered. The first problem that we will be having is a mobile device is always a partially connected device. That is, we may not guarantee always the connectivity will be existing within a mobile device. Sometimes the device will be connected, sometimes the device will not be connected with the internet. If I directly interact with the data which is stored on some web or in a cloud, and if the mobile device is not having an internet connection, then the application cannot access the data. So we have a requirement such that instead of I directly connect to the remote data, we need to have a provision for storing the information locally within the device. Then how do I store that particular information, whether in a file or in a memory location, or how that has to be accessed? How do we maintain the data cached on the device so that while the application interacts, the performance will be efficient? And whenever we wanted to access the remote data, then how do I maintain it? For example, say that I have a local data maintained in the device, and once my task is done, I wanted to push that particular data from my local database to the remote database present on the cloud. Then how do we achieve this task? These are some various problems that we will be encountering when we try to interact with the database in a mobile device. For these problems, we do have proper solutions. Say that you have a requirement such that I wanted to store the data locally in a device, then we can achieve that with the support of SQLite. And whenever we have a requirement for communication with the remote database, we can achieve that with the support of various methodologies. We can use a web service, we can use a WCF Rest Services, and we can able to get the data. And when we are trying to retrieve the information, we can get the data in the format of XML, or we can get the data in a JSON format. JSON will be preferable method when we target for the mobile devices. Sometimes we will also have a requirement such that I wanted to directly communicate with the remote data instead of using some kind of services. Even that will be possible for us to achieve. SQLite is a local device database which will be stored within the device for an application. It is not a service which has to be consumed and it has to be used, and it will not access anything outside of the device. We can store the data locally in SQLite indicates that it will try to allocate some kind of memory allocation for the application within the device which the application can access. Whatever the data that we try to store with the support of SQLite in an application or for an application, that data other applications cannot access by default. If the device is being given for the users, then we may not guarantee, but as an application, one application cannot access the data present within the SQLite from another application. SQLite also supports the basic data operations such as retrieving of data. Even it supports joins to some extent, and it supports all the data manipulation operations such as insert, update and delete. SQL.NET is an open source library provided by Frank which can be downloaded from the Xamarin store, and it can be used for performing minimal ORM operations to achieve the crude. So what is SQLite.NET meant for .NET developers? This library is exactly similar to that of our traditional ADO.NET managed providers. Whatever the operations that we used to perform with the ADO.NET, the same operations we can do with SQLite with the support of connection, data adapters, data readers and dataset. SQLite.NET not only it provides the traditional ADO.NET style of coding, it also supports the ORM mod. Since it supports ORM model, we can decorate a class with the support of some attributes like primary key, column, max length, etc. And we can make that particular thing as a database table for storing the data. SQLite is supported by Android, iOS and also Windows Phone 8 mobile devices. In this video, we will try to understand how to use SQLite ORM. To start with this thing, set up a class, decorate the class with the attributes so that we can able to create the database, the table, and let's understand how to manage with the data. So let's try to start with the demo for understanding all these things practically. Let's start the demo. Now let's try to open my Visual Studio.NET. I say file menu, new project. I try to provide a meaningful name for my application, database demo. Now once the application gets created, first let's try to have the user interface for our application. So I try to expand my resources folder. Under that we have layout. By default you have a default layout that has been provided within the main. Now let me just try to add my layout. So I right click on the layout, click on add new item. I provide a name for the layout. For example, I just mention as home. Now let's try to add the controls which are required for our layout. First, let me bring in my buttons. I open my property window. The ID, the text for this particular button, I try to provide it as create database, so that when the user clicks on this button, my requirement is I just wanted to create the database, and the name for this I just try to specify it as btn create db. Similarly, I try to place one more button where the text I try to provide it as create table, so that when the user clicks on this particular button, I would like to create a table on my device. The name for this I try to specify it as btn create table. Then I would like to provide a function for adding a record. So I say the ID as btn insert. The text I just specified as insert record, so that on clicking on this I can able to add a record to the table. Then I would like to provide one more button to specify get data, so that I can retrieve all the records what I have added to the table. I give a ID call it as btn get data. Then I would like to provide one more button to say get data by ID, so that when the user clicks on this particular button, I will be retrieving the data based on the ID. So that we can also understand how to search for a specific record using our form. Next, I try to take one more button to specify update data. So I try to provide the ID for this as btn update. Finally, another button to remove the record, so I say btn delete. So once we try to observe the entire video, we can understand how to perform the complete CRUD operations with the support of SQLite in our Android applications with the support of Xamarin. So I provide the text as delete record or delete data. So this is the user interface what I have. Now to start working with this application for interacting with the database, I need to have certain assemblies. So the first thing what I try to do was I need to add some references. So the references which I just wanted to add is add reference. I need something called as mono dot. Okay, so I need something called as mono dot data dot SQLite, as well as I need system dot data. So I select system dot data, and in order to add mono dot data dot SQLite, we can just say references, add reference. You can just click on the browse button, and then we have a framework. This is the path where you can find that particular assembly: program files, reference lib assemblies, Microsoft framework, monotouch, v1.0. In this path, you will find mono.data.sqlite. I just click on add. I say OK. So these are the assemblies which I have to reference now. Once I added this, I need the SQLite also. To do this, what I try to do was tools, library package manager. I have manage NuGet packages for solution. Try to search for SQLite. And just click on install. So this is going to add the client library to access the SQLite. So we can just try to observe it. We got these two things. So what I try to do was, before I start with this, let me create a folder. The name of the folder I call it as ORM. Let me just bring these two files to this folder. Fine. So now we prepared our application to support SQLite. Now the first activity what I wanted to do was, I wanted to create the database. So to do this, within my ORM folder, I try to add a class. For example, the name of the class I try to provide as DB repository. Now let's try to start with the things which is required for our application. Let me increase the font size a bit. I need to include certain namespaces. So I try to add using system.data. I need system.io. I even need SQLite. So once I added the namespaces which are required for our application, now let's try to start with our coding. So to start with this thing, I make this class as a public class. Now let's say code to create the database. The database has to be created within the Android device itself. So let me try to write a method called as public string create db, and within this I say where some output. I just try to concatenate creating database if it doesn't exist. Some text I just try to specify. I try to define a path, so I say db path equal to path dot combine, and I just select my environment dot for removing the ambiguity. There is an ambiguity between the system as well as the Android.os. So environment is available in both. So there is an ambiguity that you will be finding it. So I need system which belongs to my system namespace. So what I try to do is the one which I don't need, let me remove all those things so that it will be neat and clean. So environment dot, I try to select a special folder dot personal. So this is going to select the path where our Android application is going to allocate some memory for us. So once I just specified this particular thing, I just wanted to create a folder, so I simply say environment dot get folder path, and I just try to specify environment dot special folder dot personal. So I'm trying to select the folder where the Android application is going to give some memory. So once I selected this is the path where we are going to create our database. So once I done with this thing, I simply say where db equal to new SQLite connection, and I just specify the path. Then I just give a text saying that database created, and I just try to return the output. So this method is going to create the database, and it is going to specify that the database got created. Now my requirement is when the user is going to click on this particular create database button, then I need to perform this activity. So what I try to do is, now I try to go for my main activity, and before that let me just build the solution. So I try to go for the file called as main activity.cs. In this I just wanted to first specify that the default activity is not main. I have an activity layout called as home, and in this home what we have to perform. So the first thing what I wanted to do is create the database. So I have to refer to the button which is present within the home layout. So what I try to do is I simply say button something like create db, find by view by id which is of type button, and I say resource dot id dot btn create db. So I'm just trying to reference that particular button present within our home layout. Now whenever the user is going to click on that button, I attach an event handler for this. So within this what I try to do now is I just simply create an object for my db repository, something like dbr equal to new db repository, and I say where some result equal to dbr dot create database. Then I just wanted to show this message as an alert, so I say toast dot make text this comma result comma toast length dot short dot show. So this is going to give a notification for us saying that whatever the result we have. Okay, now let us try to execute this thing. So before I try to execute it, I need to set my minimum Android version. So I select it as level 15, and let me just try to execute just for testing it whether the database is getting created or not. So for performance sake, I already opened my emulator so that it will not take much time, because emulators takes a lot of time to start up. So we can just try to observe it. The application is getting copied to the device, synchronizing the assemblies, and deployment has been succeeded, so that we can see this application deployed to our device. So the first button I have is create database. When I click on it, so we can see that creating database, it doesn't exist. So the first task has been successfully achieved. My next requirement is I would like to create the table. So in order to create the table, what I need to do is I need to have a model for that. So I try to right click on ORM, add a class, and I give a name called as to do tasks. Okay, that's the name of the class which I just provided here. In this, let me just try to remove all the unnecessary things. I try to include some namespace, like say using system dot data, and I require system dot IO using SQLite. Then I try to define this as a public class to do tasks, and the name of the table I wanted to specify it as a table attribute. This is going to specify that what should be the name of the table. So I give a name called as to do tasks. That's the name I'm trying to provide it. I need a column, so I say the name of the column is ID, and this ID I want to specify it as a primary key, so I decorate it with the attribute called as primary key, and this should be an auto incremented column, and I just refer this column as underscore ID. So this is the decoration which I have done for my ID property. Next, I try to specify a string called as task, where this I try to decorate by saying that max length is going to be 50. So these are the attributes which I just used it for defining this table. Now based on this particular information what we have, I would like to create the table. Now in order to create this particular table, what I try to do is, let me just try to open my DB repository class once again. Let's try to add the code for this. Code to create the table. I call a method called as public string create table. Now I need to have so I try to take the support of try catch so that if anything goes wrong we can handle it. First I need to establish the connection. The code for the connection is going to remain the same, so let me copy the same thing. We can even declare it globally and access it. Just for the demo purpose, I'm trying to write it in this thing. Now once I have the database connection established, now I want to create the table. So I say db dot create table, and I have to specify the name of the table that I wanted to use it. So I say to do tasks and I just specify this. Then I say string result table created successfully. I would like to return this particular result. If somewhere something goes wrong, I simply say return, I say error ex.message. So this is a simple method which is going to create a table within the Android application with the support of SQLite. Now this code I have to hook up to my layout. So what I do is I once again open my main activity. So within this main activity, what I do is to create the table, I need to refer the button. So btn create table, I say find by view id. This is a button where the resource dot id dot, I wanted to refer to a button called as create button. When the user is going to click on create table, I try to attach an event handler now. So the first thing what I try to do is I say db repository dbr equal to new db repository. Then I say where result equal to dbr dot create table, and then I just wanted to show up this notification. So toast dot make text this comma result comma toast length dot short dot show. So this is how you're going to add a table. Now let's try to understand how to add a record. Now in order to add a record, what I try to do is, let me go to my DB repository, code to insert a record. So what I do is, I simply say public string insert record string some task. I take the support of try catch so that if something goes wrong, we can also handle this. Now the first thing I need to have is my connection. So I establish this connection, and after this what I do is I simply say to do tasks some item equal to new to do task. Then what I try to do is I say item dot task equal to the value what I am passing. Then I say db dot insert and I just pass on my object. So whenever you wanted to add a record, we just have to use something like db dot insert, and I say return, I just give it record added. If somewhere something goes wrong, I say return error and whatever the error message. Now if I have a requirement for adding a record, I need a layout for accepting this. So now let's try to design the layout for this. So I try to open my solution explorer. Under the layouts, what I try to do is I try to add a layout. I say add new item, I select an Android layout. You can just give any meaningful name for this layout. I say insert task layout. So I just provided an option. Now what I try to do is let's try to take the controls, like say text of large, I go to the properties. The text I try to specify it as add new task. Then I try to take a text of a medium so that I can just give a text saying that enter new task. Then I would like to take a text box. So what I try to do was I say a plain text where the ID for this thing I try to provide it as txt task. And then I would like to place a button as well for creating this. So I say btn task, and the text for this button I give it as add task. So this is the layout that what we have to prepare. So once this particular layout has been created, now this particular layout should be associated with an activity. So what I try to do is I right click on my application, I say add new item, I select an activity, and I would like to provide that activity now. So what I try to do is the name I call it as insert task activity. I build the solution so that this layout information will be available for my application. So I have a task available here. Now what I try to do is in this I have to first set the content view. So to do this I say set content view resource dot, I just simply specify layout dot insert task layout. This is the content view which is going to be associated with. Then I need to refer to the control. So I say button btn add equal to find view by id of type button, and then I just simply say resource dot id dot btn task. That's what I just try to add it. Next what I try to do was I say btn add dot click, I attach a event handler. Now what I try to do was I have to get the value what the user is going to provide on the text box. So edit the text txt text equal to find view by id, the control is of type edit text, and I just mention resource dot id dot, I just say txt task. So once I have this information, then I say db repository dbr equal to new db repository. That's what I try to specify here. So once I created an object for the db repository, I say string result equal to dbr dot insert record, and I pass txt task dot text. And once I got this thing, I say toast dot make text, and I say this comma result comma toast length dot short, and I click on show. So we prepared a layout and also an activity that has been associated. And my requirement is this layout should be invoked whenever the user is going to click on the add record or insert record which is present within our home layout. So I have to open the main activity and I have to hook up this thing. So what I try to do was, I try to say to insert the record, I need to refer to the button, so I say btn add record. I say find view by ID, and this is going to be a button where I say resource dot ID dot we have a button called as btn insert. Now btn add record dot click, I just adding this event handler. Now what I need to do is, when the user is going to click on this, I need to start an activity. So I say start activity, type of, what is the name of the activity? So the name of the activity is insert task activity. Now let's try to execute and check out till here, is everything is working fine or not. So it's detecting, removing the previous version of our application, copying the application to the device again. So synchronized all the assemblies and the deployment got succeeded. Now we can see our application in our emulator. So we can say create database, created the table. I wanted to insert a record, so I click on insert record. This is my task 1, record added. We can have a button to clear this also. I say to add task, we have it. Okay, so once we have done with this, my next requirement is when the user clicks on get data, whatever the records that we are going to added, those records I would like to retrieve back. So I'm not closing my emulator. If you close it, it takes a lot of time to open it again. So what we need to do is, I need to have a method for retrieving all the records. To do that, let's try to write the code to retrieve all the records. So now what I do is, I simply say public, I return a string information directly, get records. First we have to establish the connection. So once the connection has got established, next what I try to do is string some output. I would like to display some information, retrieving the data using ORM. We can even use our SQLite with the database traditional style also. In the next video I will be showing you how to do that. Now I just have to first reference to the table, so I say db.table. I am going to refer to a table called as to do tasks. Once I refer to the table, then what I need to do is, I have to get all the records. So I say for each, where some item in table, I just try to say output plus equal to, every time I try to go to the new line, I say item dot ID plus item dot task. I'm just trying to concatenate with this information, and once this is done, I try to return back this output. So this is a very simple code that we have here now. So once we have written this particular repository code, now I have to hook up this in our main activity. So I try to open up my main activity. To retrieve the data. So I say button btn something like get all, find view by id, some button, resource dot id dot get data, and then I say btn get all click. I'm attaching the event handler. Once I attach this particular event handler, now my requirement is I need to get all the records. So what I do is I say db repository dbr equal to new repository where some result equal to get all records. I just try to make text this comma result comma toast length dot short dot show. That's it. So I'm just trying to do this. Now let me just try to click on start. So waiting for the device. Since the previous version will be removed, it's advisable to do from the beginning. Let me first create the database, the table. Let me insert a record. This is my task 1. Add a record. I have 2 records added. I click on get data. So whatever the previous informations are there, all the records we are able to retrieve it. Okay. Now once we got this thing, my next requirement what I have is get data by ID. Okay. So when the user is going to click on get data by ID, I would like to provide a layout where the user can provide the ID, and when the user clicks on the search, then my requirement is the relevant record I wanted to show. So to do this, let's try to start with our repository. So what I try to do is I open my repository class. Code to retrieve specific record using ORM. Now when I wanted to do this, what I try to do was I simply say public string get task by ID, for example, and I need to pass an ID. The first thing is I have to establish the connection, so I done with this. After I establish the connection, next what I try to do was I simply say where item equal to db.get, and I need to pass the name of the table type tasks, and I have to pass the primary key column value, so I am passing the ID. Once I got this particular thing, then I say return item dot task. So get is a method which is going to retrieve the record based on a primary key column value. Now once I prepared this repository, the next thing what I need to do is I need to have a layout for the search. So what I try to do is, in order to prepare the layout, I right click on the layouts, add new item, Android layout. So I can give a meaningful name, so I say search layout. Now let's try to provide the user interface which is required for us. I try to take a text large. I open up the properties. Search task. Then I take a text of size medium. Then I just try to provide something like enter task ID, After this, I would like to have a plain text box where the ID for this text box I try to provide it as txt task ID. Then I would like to place a button to say search, and the ID for this button I say btn search. Okay, now once this layout has been prepared, this layout should be associated with an activity. So let me just try to add a new item. I select an activity. The name of the activity I call it as search activity. So within the search activity, what I try to do was first I need to set up my content view. So I say set content view, and before I do anything, let me build the solution so that this layout will be recognized. So set content view resource dot layout dot, I just simply say search layout. Then what I do is I say button btn search equal to find view by this thing button. I need to refer to it, so I say resource dot id dot btn search. Then I say btn search dot click. I have to hook up this. Now my main requirement is I have to first create an object for the db repository. Then what I try to do is I need to get the value what the user has typed in, so I say txt id find view by id edit text resource dot id dot txt task id, and once I got this thing I say string task equal to tbr dot get task by id int dot parse of txt id dot text, and I say toast dot make text this, and the task I say short, and then I say dot show. So once we have done with this thing, next my requirement is this has to be attached to my main activity. So what I try to do is I just open up my main activity. So I say to retrieve specific record, I say button btn get by id find view by id button resource dot id btn get data by id. I simply say get by id dot click. I'm just attaching this. Now whenever the user is going to click on this, then my requirement is I need to start an activity. So I say start activity type of search activity. That's a code which I just have it. Now once again let me try to execute this, and remember one thing, if the previous version of the copy has been removed, then you have to start from the create database, else it will give you a error. So sometimes it will not remove the previous versions in the emulator, then the table records will be maintained for us. If it removes then the previously added the records will not be visible. So now let's try to start with this again. Since it is a demo purpose emulator, we have to do in this way only for understanding whether it is working or not. So I created the database and I insert a record. I say this is my task 1. Once again I'm adding this thing. This is my new task 2. Added some records. Now if I say get data, we see this only 2 things. It's not maintaining the previous record, because this time when you just try to observe it, it removed the previous version of our application from the emulator. Now when I click on get data by ID, it will try to go for our activity where we have to specify the ID. So I say enter task ID 1, I give it, I click on search, this is my task 1. When I provide 2, I get a message called as this is my task 2. So we could able to retrieve the data also. Now the next thing what I wanted to do was, when the user clicks on update data, I wanted to provide a layout where the user can search for a particular record, and once the record has been searched, then I would like to modify the data also. Now let's see how we can able to do this. So the first thing what I try to do was, let me add the repository method for performing this task. So the first thing what we do is the code for update the record using ORM. So I need this particular code. So what I do is, I say public string update record. This need 2 things. One is an ID, the other one is the task. So once I got this thing, I need to copy the connectivity code. Once the connection has got established, next what I try to do was, I need to get the record which I wanted to modify. So I say where item equal to, we know that get is a method which is used for searching the record based on primary key. So I will pass the ID so that the record will be retrieved. Then I say item.task equal to task. I am just updating the existing object. Now in order to update the value, so I say db.update and I just pass on the item. And then finally what I do was, I say return record updated. So we have prepared a repository method. So once we prepared this particular thing, my next requirement is I need a layout for interacting with this. So I go to my layouts, add new item, Android layout. I say update layout or update task layout. So let's try to design the layout what we require. First I try to take a larger text. I set the properties. Then I go for a medium text where I give a text as enter task ID. Then I would like to go for a plain text box where the ID I say txt task ID, and then I would like to provide a button for searching. So I say btn search. So I say search. Once I given this particular search, then my next requirement is I take one more medium text the task what we have it. I go for a plain text. The ID for this particular thing I say txt task. So once I got this thing, next I would like to have a button to update this thing. So I give a name called as btn update. So the text for this I say update. So this is the layout what we have. So once this layout has been done, let me build the solution. Okay. So this layout now has to be associated with an activity. So what I try to do is I add an activity. I selected an activity. I give a name called as update task activity. So once I say update task activity, now let's try to hook up our code. So the first thing I need to say that is set content view equal to, I have to specify resource dot layout dot update task layout. So we have attached this activity for this layout. Next what I try to do is I say button btn search equal to find by id, which is going to be of type button, and I say resource dot id dot btn search. Then I say btn search dot click, the event handler I attached. Now what I try to do is I create an object for the repository dbr equal to new this thing, and once I have this, what I try to do is I simply try to say edit text txt id equal to find view by id. This is an edit text where I say resource dot id dot tst task id. Once I got this information, next what I try to do is I have a requirement such that I have to get this information. Next I need is edit text tst task equal to find view by id edit text resource dot id dot txt task. Now what I do is tst task dot text equal to dbr dot okay, get task by id. I say int dot parts of txt id dot text. So I'm just trying to search for this particular record. Now once I retrieve this thing, this is for the search button click. Now whenever the user is going to click on the update, I need to do something similar. So I say button btn update find view by id. So I say button resource dot id dot btn update and btn update dot click plus equal to, I just mentioned this. Now what we can do here is, once we have this particular thing, I need to write the code for the update task. So I first get the text txt id equal to find view by id, edit text resource dot id dot txt task id, and txt task edit text, I say resource dot id dot txt task. So we have attached these two text boxes, or referenced as this two text boxes. Next what I do is I create an object for my repository, and then I say string result equal to dbr dot update record into dot parse of txt id dot text and txt task dot text, and then I just wanted to say make text this comma result comma toast length dot short dot show. So we prepared the repository, we prepared a layout, we added an activity for this layout. Now the next thing that I have to do is I have to attach this particular thing to our main activity, so that when the user clicks on the button update record, I should able to do this. So what I try to do now is in the main activity I say to update the record. First I say button btn update find view by id button resource dot id dot btn update. After this btn update dot click, I have attached this. Now the thing what I try to do is, once we have attached this information, I need to start my activity. So I say start activity, type of, I just specify update task activity. Now once again let's try to execute this thing. In case if you observe it, the previous one is not removed and all. Okay, if removing previous version of application is not there, then the previous data will always be maintained. Since we are trying to rebuild the application, it will always remove the previous copies and it will try to add the new version. But once it has been done permanently, the records will be maintained for us. I created the database, the table, I insert a record. This is my task 1. This is my task 2. I added the record. Then if I wanted to retrieve all the records, we got both the records. We can search for a particular ID, and in case if I wanted to update the data, I click on update data. I can just specify this, say search, the record is available. This is my updated task 1. The record has been updated. Now if I just try to say get data, you can see this is my updated task 1. So the record is getting updated. Finally, the last thing that we have to understand is how to remove a record. So let's try to understand it quickly. I stop the debugging. I hope you are clear with how the process goes on. First, I would like to add the code in my repository for removing the record. So code to remove the record using ORM. In the next video I will be using SQLite, and I will be working with the traditional ADO.NET style of coding for interacting with the local database in Android application. Make sure that you watch that video as well. Now let me just try to first give the connection, public string, I say remove task, I need the ID. First I copied my connection, then what I try to do was I say where item equal to db.get to do tasks, and I pass the ID. So first I need to get the item, then once I get the item, in order to remove it I have to simply say db.delete and that item, and I say return record deleted. Now once this has been done, I need a layout for accepting the ID for removing. So what we do is we go to the layouts and let's add a layout for remove. So Android layout, and I say remove task layout. So I would like to have a quite a simple thing. First I would like to have a large text. Open the property window. I give a text called as remove an existing task. Then I take a medium text box or a text where I say enter task ID. Then I would like to have a plain text where the ID I try to specify it as txt task ID, and then I need a button to say delete. So I say btn delete. The text is delete. Once I have the layout, let me build the solution so that the layout will be visible for us. Now once the layout is been done, then I need an activity to hook up. So I say add new item, selected an activity, and I say remove task activity. So the first thing that I would like to do in this case is I need to set the content view. So what I try to do was I simply say set content view resource dot layout dot remove task layout. So once I done with this thing, I say button btn remove equal to find view by ID. I say button resource dot id dot btn delete. So once I done with this thing, I say btn remove dot click. I attach the event handler. Now what I try to do was once I done with this thing, I say db repository dbr equal to new repository edit text txt task id find view by id. It's going to be an edit text where I say resource dot id dot txt task id. I just try to specify this particular thing, and once I have this task id that has been available, next what I try to do was string result equal to dbr dot remove task int dot parts of txt task id dot text. Then I say toast dot make text this comma result comma toast length dot short dot show. I just specify this. And the last thing that what I need to do is, whenever the user is going to click on delete, then I have to do this. So I open my main task, and the last option I try to do is to delete the record. I say button btn delete, find view by id, resource dot id dot btn delete. Then I say btn delete dot click plus equal to, we have it. So when the user is going to click on this, I would like to start an activity called as type of remove task activity. Once done with this thing, now let's try to execute our application. I hope everyone is clear with how we can use SQLite and Xamarin with your C# for interacting with the local database within a Android application. This application has covered how to create a database, how to create a tables within your Android device, add, update, delete, retrieve also. Now let me do this operation. So created the database. As every time I'm executing it, it's removing the previous version. I'm trying to create this thing, but when it is live, it will not happen in this way. This is my task 1. This is my task 2. This is my task 3. So we have added 3 records now. So when I click on get data, all the 3 records are available. Now I click on delete data. It provides a layout for me to provide the value. So I enter the task ID 2, record got deleted. Now if I try to get all the data, we can see that 1 and 3 is being available, 2 is not available. So in this way we can even delete the record. Hope this video given a clear information. In the next video, I will explain how to perform the database activities with the support of SQLite and ADO.NET style of coding. And in case if you are new for this, make sure that you watch my Android application development with Visual C# before watching this video. If you like this video, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. This encourages me to develop more and more videos. Thank you, yours Shekhar.